Hello, and thank you for joining us in the Salon. I'm Adam Smith. I'm delighted to be hosting today's meeting, which is all about acing job interviews. If you're new to the Salon, let me quickly explain the format. We start with a 30-minute live stream, which includes 2 talks from brilliant speakers who have a unique take on the topic. Then we have a discussion. I'll put some questions to them, and then we'll spend the last 20 to 30 minutes joining you all in the chat, where you can share your own experiences on this topic as well and ask questions of each other and of our incredible guests. So let me get on with some introductions. Our 2 speakers are Dr. Chloe Fawns-Ritchie and Dr. Warren Donnellan. Hi, both of you. Chloe, so I'm going to do some proper introductions now, and they're going to correct me when I totally get this wrong. Chloe has an MA and a PhD in psychology from the University of Edinburgh, and she's very recently left a postdoc position at Dundee to take up a lecture back at Edinburgh as well. She has some pretty recent experience on acing a job interview. Chloe's research explores cognitive aging, chronic pain, and psychological predictors of health. Does that sound right, Chloe? Suddenly,
yeah, sounds perfect.
I could hear you. I was suddenly worried that I couldn't hear you. Warren, on the other hand, is a senior lecturer in the Department of Psychology at University of Liverpool. So we got 2 psychologists today. That it's funny because I should explain how these salon sessions came about. Is there was no planning. No, that's not true. There's lots of planning to get 120 people to volunteer. But how the pairings worked, there was no it was more around diary availability than their individual expertise. So I kind of love how we're bringing together people that you'd never necessarily normally see on a program together. But I feel there could be a program that would have the 2 of you on it naturally. So Warren's research interests lie in intersection of areas of resilience and unpaid caregiving and dementia. Have you recently also aced a job interview, Warren?
I wouldn't say aced. I took part.
Hey, listen, scraped through is just as good.
I was promoted to senior lecturer last March. So
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Fairly fresh. Yeah.
So to help us get into the topic, let's reflect. Getting an interview these days is hard enough, but once you have your foot through the door, what does it take to stand out in this highly competitive academic and academic research positions? How do you tailor your experience to answer some of the questions, and how can you showcase your soft skills and prepare? Just some of the things that we're going to explore, but I genuinely have no idea what Chloe and Warren are going to talk about today. They've been given a free rein to present how they like. So throughout the discussion today, don't forget you can post your questions in the chat, and we'll also join you in there in about 30-40 minutes time. But that's enough from me. Chloe, I'm going to let you go first. Chloe, we've had some screen share testing before we started, and it worked for Chloe. So let's hope
interesting.
It works.
So I'm now seeing something different than what I saw when we tested. So that's always fun. Okay.
In the meantime, I will be pulling up Warren's slides, which I'm going to hold for him. And
it seems to be sorted now. So let me know that you can see what you probably should see, and not other stuff as well.
We absolutely can. So over to you, Chloe.
Oh, perfect. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Chloe Fawns-Ritchie. As Adam mentioned, I work as a lecturer in psychology at the University of Edinburgh. I just started this job this month, and I interviewed for this job in spring. So the process of going through applying for and interviewing for a job is very, very fresh in my mind. So although this talk is called Acing Job Interviews, I really think to ace a job interview requires some prep work beforehand. So I'm going to talk about preparing to apply for jobs, at the actual application and the interview itself. Now, my advice today is very much based on my experience applying for jobs, the experience I've seen of colleagues and friends applying for research type jobs, but I've also been involved in interview panels for postdoc and for lecturer positions as well. But it's very much based on my experience and also the fact I'm a psychologist, so it could be different in different areas. I think that we should be thinking about applying for and interviewing for jobs as a skill. And because it's a skill, it does take quite a lot of time and effort to get good at this skill. But because it is a skill, it's something that you can develop over time, so that the more you take part in sort of interviews and the more you prepare, the better you can get at doing it. So if you've had a terrible experience in an interview in the past, don't worry, you can get better. One of the ways to get better is to start preparing early, and I mean years early. So for example, when I'm talking to PhD students, I always encourage them in the first half of their PhD to be thinking about the types of jobs that they will be applying for once they've come to the end of their PhD. What I would recommend doing is having a look at jobs that are currently going and thinking about the job descriptions and the criteria, and looking at the criteria and reflecting on the sort of skills, knowledge and experience that you currently have, and also thinking about what skills you don't have. And the reason to do this early is because then it gives you time to sort of prioritize your work and think about, okay, how can you go about gaining these skills between now and say the end of your PhD, so that when you're applying for that first postdoc position, you've got those skills. Another way is continually and get advice early and continually throughout really your entire career. So the obvious place is to go to mentors, so things like your line manager, your supervisor, speak about the types of jobs you want and ask them for advice about what experience you would benefit from getting now to be able to help you with that. But actually, what I found more helpful is speaking to people just ahead of you. So if you're going for a postdoc position, speak to people who have recently applied for and successfully got a postdoc position. Ask them how they went about it. Look at their CVs. Ask if they can share their applications. That's almost more helpful because it's a bit more, they know what that process looked like very recently. So say you see a job that you actually want to apply for, then the first thing you need to think about is submitting an application. And we should be thinking about the application as your way of demonstrating why you are right for this job. So whenever I've written an application, I've always tried to sort of answer 3 questions. So firstly, why this job? So here you want to demonstrate your knowledge of the job, what the job will entail. It might be, if it's a research group, looking knowledge of the research that the group they're doing and why you're passionate about it, why you're passionate about that type of work. You also want to demonstrate why you. So this isn't just, you don't want to just say that the role itself is good. You need to say that what you add to the role. So you want to look at what sort of unique skills you have that would not only align with the group that you're applying for, but also what unique things you would add to it. So how would they benefit from having you? And also, why now? So this is the idea that you want to look at what you've done before now, leading up to this moment, and think about the trajectory that's ahead of you. Why is now the perfect time for them to hire you for this specific role? And it's also quite a lot of work applying for a job, so it's worthwhile starting drafting the application early and thinking of it as an iterative process, so revising it. Get people to look over it. So get feedback from both your peers, that might be your colleagues or your friends, but also mentors as well. One thing I found myself is that sometimes mentors are better at identifying strengths in you than you are yourself. So get them to read over it and they can sort of say, oh, well, here's all the stuff here's a key strength that you have that you've not put in your application, so that you can sort of really strengthen the application and submit the best possible application that you can. So if you've submitted the best possible application, then you might be invited for the interview. And like every other step of applying for a job, preparing for an interview involves quite a lot of work. So there's some sort of studying you need to do. So it's worthwhile studying the lab or the group or the company that you're going to work with. So for example, if they do dementia research, you might want to go away and read some of the key papers from the group. You might want to learn about the types of methods or techniques that they use so that you can feel comfortable talking about them in your interview. And what surprised me in the past is that you kind of have to study yourself as well. So by the time you get to the interview, the people that are interviewing you have probably read your application in great detail, and they might ask you specific questions about it. So make sure you feel comfortable and confident being able to talk about whatever you put in the application. Sometimes the application can come months, the interview can come months after the application, so definitely study yourself as well. The biggest worry people have about an interview is the questions that are going to be asked. You don't know what's going to come up. Now, while that's true to some extent, there are sort of standard questions that are going likely to come up at most interviews. So you can prepare answers for these questions. So the first thing to do would be to speak to your mentors, supervisors, line managers who would interview for a similar type of job, or speak to people who have been for an interview for similar types of jobs before, and ask them what they would ask interviewees, or what they were asked in an interview, and use them as examples of how to prepare answers. You can also just search it online. So if you were going for a postdoc position, say, if you just Google standard or common postdoc interview questions, you can usually get a list of like 15, 20 questions. So you can be using these kinds of generic questions as a way to start preparing answers. But almost always, the very first question you're going to be asked in an interview is going to be something along the lines of, why did you apply for this job, and why are you a good fit for this job? So it's a very good idea to try and prepare a very strong answer to that question, because it will help you feel more confident and relax into the interview if you're really able to nail that first question. What you really want to do is identify the sort of unique skills and abilities that you have that's right for this job, and sort of practice trying to weave it into fitting into the types of questions that are typically asked in interviews. The other piece of advice that I found particularly useful myself is practicing talking aloud. So when you're preparing your interview answers, make sure you're actually talking aloud. We write very differently than we speak, so we want to make sure that we get comfortable speaking about our experience and our skills. And in the best possible situation would be to have a mock interview, and this could be a supervisor, it could be a friend, or even a partner. So for example, you could give a partner or a friend a list of sort of 20 generic questions and ask them to ask 6 or 7 questions, and then you can get a really good sort of practice of what an interview might be like. So when it comes to the actual interview itself, you'll be nervous, and that's fine. Everybody will be nervous. Don't worry if you sound nervous, or if you look nervous, you might be shaking or a bit clammy. That is okay. Interviewers know, we've all been there as well. We know that this is a really sort of daunting experience. So if you feel nervous, don't worry about that. Everybody else who's been interviewing for the job will also feel nervous. The other thing is, make sure you're trying to pay attention to the questions that they ask, and try to really focus on answering them. Take your time. So one thing I typically do is I take along a notebook and a pen to an interview, and if it's quite a complex question, I'll note down sort of the key terms so that I can really focus on answering them. But don't be afraid to ask for questions to be repeated, or for clarification for what they're actually asking, so that you can ensure you're answering what they want you to answer. And also just be aware that asking for the question to be repeated actually gives you a little bit more time as well to think about an answer. So it's useful for particularly challenging questions to ask for that clarification. Just gives you a little more thinking time. Whatever the outcome of the interview, make sure you take time to sort of reflect on the fact that it's great that you got that far. Getting an interview is very challenging. So perhaps reward yourself with something nice, a nice meal out or something. Reward yourself with the fact you got through that very tiring and probably unpleasant experience. Now, there's one of 2 outcomes of the interview. So firstly, you might get the job, and that's excellent. So make sure that you're sort of celebrating that you got the job. However, be aware that your work isn't done. This is a very good time to think about negotiation. So that we in research, because it's such a competitive market, we can sometimes focus on, oh, well, we should just feel so lucky that we've been offered a job. We can't possibly ask for any accommodations. But that's just not true. If you've been offered the job, it's because they want you. So this is your time to negotiate. So that would be things like your salary. It would be things like maybe hybrid working, but also think ahead. Think about your future. What do you really want what would benefit you in this role from doing? So it might be that there's a specific area of research that you're really interested in working on. So ask in the negotiation phase to be working on that. Unfortunately, often the answer is you didn't get the job, and this just feels rubbish. There is no way around it. It doesn't get any easier. Rejection is always tough. So take time to sort of wallow and to be upset, because that's a legitimate feeling to be upset that you didn't get the job. take time to process it. You might want to take a day away, annual leave, or do something fun. Just don't think about work for a little while. But once you've had chance to process it, if we're thinking about this as a skill and a learning experience, then do make sure to spend a little bit of time reflecting on how what went well, what didn't go well. Also ask for feedback. It may be that they are able to identify things that perhaps didn't go so well for you that you can then use. There's always going to be another interview. So do try to see that even if it was an unsuccessful interview, try and use it as a learning process. Now that might feel very daunting and you might feel overwhelmed, and you won't be the only one that feels overwhelmed thinking about this process, but you shouldn't feel alone. You should have support there. And I see it as a role of mentors to be helping to develop these skills applying for and sort of trying to ace interviews. And that includes allowing time to develop. So if you are a PhD supervisor or you have a postdoc researcher on your team, you should be allowing those people time to develop these skills. And that might be regular meetings to talk about career development. It might be actual time to work on CV or applications as well. And that's especially true if you are a student on a fixed term contract. I feel quite strongly that you should be given time within your workload to be able to work on these things. Don't be afraid to ask for support from peers. So ask friends and colleagues to look over applications, to give advice. Ask your supervisors, line managers to look over documents and sort of share their advice. Don't be afraid to reach out to people either. The worst they can do is say no. Obviously ask politely, but don't be afraid to ask. And the final thing is make sure that you're returning the favor. So make sure you're offering support as well. So offer support to your peers and your colleagues. So if somebody else is going for an interview, do a mock interview with them, read over their documents. In addition to being really rewarding, it's actually very beneficial to you to look at other people's applications and how they go through the interview process, because you can learn quite a lot quite quickly watching other people about what works and what doesn't work. And if you yourself are a mentor, if you are looking supervising PhD students or postdoc students, or at any level really, be aware that part of your role as being a mentor is to help develop these skills in applying for and getting jobs. I certainly couldn't be where I am today without an extremely supportive network of people around me who have helped me to get where I am. So it's always worth remembering the support you had and making sure that you return the favour and you offer support as well. Thanks very much. That's just a few tips from me about sort of the whole entire process of applying for jobs.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chloe. Do you know what? You've been so comprehensive that you've already answered all the questions that I got lined up to raise with this in this pre-bit. Let me see if I can find something in there that see, I've got in there, how do you deal with nerves? You kind of address that. Do you have any tricks? Do you have like the elastic band on your wrist, or do you
I guess
extra strong deodorant beforehand?
I guess there's a couple of things. Do you want me to stop sharing my slides?
Yes, please.
Yep. Okay, I'll do that. Hang on. I clicked stop sharing, but
yeah, that's okay.
Yep, there we go. Okay. So in terms of, I guess the way I prepare around nerves is just I'm overly prepared. I do so much prep before an interview so that I go in feeling a bit confident. But yeah, I think one of the best pieces of advice I ever got is, if you feel nervous, so does everybody else. So realizing actually, like, everybody who is interviewing will feel equally sort of terrified, and that's at least sort of makes you realize that it's not just you. But in terms of how to sort of can my nerves, there are ways to just kind of slow down the interview. So I have, for example, in an interview said, when they asked a really difficult question, I said something along the lines of, oh, that's a really difficult question. I'm going to pour myself a glass of water and have a drink and think about it. So then I'm just giving myself that sort of 10 seconds, 15 seconds to, in my mind, sort of prepare it. So I think there is things you can do, and the interviewers know it, so kind of own up to it. Like just say, that's hard, I don't know, I'm going to take time to do it.
I think also as well, not to be afraid of a little bit of silence. Leaving a slightly longer pause is fine. I know if it might feel like that 3 seconds might feel like an age, but it really isn't. And I think because we always feel like we need to be filling those gaps, and leaving a bit of a pause, I think is important. How do you deal with unexpected questions? It's always kind of one of those people on the panel that wants to throw a curveball at you. And how do you deal with those unexpected questions?
I guess it comes similar to my answer before. You do sort of take your time. You know, you can sort of ponder it a little bit. But I do think that what I talked about is trying to figure out how to weave your what your key strengths are into the answer. It might be worth, when you're prepping, have at mock interviews, try and just have people throw curveball questions in to see how you sort of deal with that. But I think the other thing, and this is from my experience of sitting on interview panels, if you fluff a question, it actually, one question fluffed is not the end of the world. I think you sitting there, it feels like it is when you know you've really fluffed an answer. You suddenly you focus on it, it's all you think about, but it's not what the interviewers are thinking about. They do move on, and if you can if you do fluff one, you won't be the only one. Other people are going to fluff an answer too. So if you do struggle to answer a question, try not to worry about it and try to move on, and not let it sort of impact the performance for the rest of the interview.
Something I tried last night, just in preparation for this discussion today, was I took an extract from a person specification for a job. I pasted it into ChatGPT and said, "This is a job I'm applying for. Can you give me a long list of questions you think I might be asked when during the interview?" And it literally gave me 50 questions. And I think going through that, in my head, I was able to kind of go, okay, this is particularly scenario-based questions. You know, can you give me an example of a time when an experiment's gone wrong? Or can you give me an example of a time when you've led a big project or something? It kind of allowed me to, even if I didn't fully work out the answer, it definitely allowed me to think through the example that I would use and draw on that.
The other really useful thing to do is, if you have an interview, or if you know people that are going for interviews, after the interview, get them to write down what they were asked, so that you can sort of have a bank of the types of questions that people ask. We've done that in our group, and it was actually after my interview, the first thing I did was go to a cafe and write down what I could remember about the questions I was asked, and that's a really good idea.
And that's exactly what our community is all about. That's what dementia researcher communities is all about. Use those career chat spaces for exactly this purpose. They're not getting a lot of utilization right now, but do that. Go, if you've just had an interview, go in there, post the questions that you've just had. It'll help somebody. Anyway, Warren, you've been very patient. Thank you very much for waiting. Your slides are coming courtesy of me. So let me share my screen, and I'm afraid we're going to have that dreaded thing that we all remember, which is next slide, please. Please. Yes. Over to you.
Yeah, I've actually changed room as well because of my internet, so yeah, thanks for bearing with me. Thanks everyone. So yeah, hi to everyone here and everyone watching later as well. Great talk, Chloe. Really reassuring to hear lots of overlap. Obviously, Chloe and I didn't know each other before, and we were talking about the same kinds of things, which is really interesting. So as Adam said earlier, my name is Warren. I'm a senior lecturer at Liverpool University in the Department of Psychology, and my role is mainly teaching focused at the moment, but I've always been really research active. I've got a lot of experience supervising projects, PhD students, postdocs, research assistants, and so on. And my research is in and around dementia. It's something I'm really passionate about. But what I want to do in my 10 minutes now is just really focus on those practical tips. I think I'm due to speak at a future salon around the navigating the promotion landscape and the promotion side of things, but I really wanted to just drill down into what those practical advice and guidance is around the interview itself. So yeah, next slide, please. So a bit about me, just to give you that context. So I've never left Liverpool, never quite decided whether that's a good or a bad thing, but did my undergraduate there, got onto a PhD there back in 2012, alongside this job teaching statistics to undergraduate students. And as you can see, just sort of gradually progressed my way through. So each of these, the university teach job was actually an interview, because I was essentially made redundant and had to reapply. And then the subsequent interviews were promotion interviews. Also been through the confirmation and appointment interview that we all have to do as well. So lots of experience there. But at the same time, if you can just click, Adam, is development of these skills, which we all develop. You know, I'm a qualitative researcher primarily. So actually we develop skills as qualitative interviews, which are absolutely relevant to job interviews as well, around, you know, sensitivity with the questions and how to put people at ease, but also like in terms of what it means to be a good interviewee and what we expect to see. Obviously, lots of experience being interviewed, and then people start asking me to be part of interview panels, like Chloe said as well. So you get both sides of the coin. So lots of experiences to share, but just as Chloe said, I think earlier, just as a disclaimer, there's a lot of trial and error here. You know, what I'm saying won't necessarily work. It's very much kind of take what you want and ignore the rest. And as I said, the focus is going to be on the interview itself rather than the pre and the post. Next slide, please. Great. So I think the whole point of an interview is to supplement and highlight important aspects of your paperwork. And there is a lot of paperwork, isn't there? You've got your CV, you've got your application form. At Liverpool, we've got this thing called a portfolio of activity, which is like a repository of everything that you've ever done. And it's a nightmare to maintain. But the point of that interview, that 10, 15 minutes if you're lucky, is to really showcase yourself and convince the panel that you actually did all of this important work. The first thing I would say, if you can just click, Adam, is setting the atmosphere. So you can't rely on the panel to do that for you. So from the moment you walk in the room, whether that be on Zoom, Teams, in person, it's about setting this sort of enthusiastic energy, get a conversational flow going with the panel. I know it's hard when you're nervous, and I'll talk about steps that you can take to calm your nervous system in a moment. But I think what's really important is for you as the interviewee, as the candidate, to actually set that atmosphere, because what that does is that forms a breeding ground to have those really good conversations with the panel about what you've done, why you did it, and demonstrating your skill set. Something that I've learned particularly in my recent promotion interview. Second thing I'd say is be your own hype guy. So for those of you who don't know, a hype guy is someone, usually in like hip hop music, who kind of supports their primary performer with exclamations, ad libs, and it increases the energy and the engagement of the audience. Now, the whole point where I'm going with this is you can't rely on your referees. You can't rely on your paperwork to do that job for you. You've got to do that for yourself. And this is about branding yourself. And it seems a bit cheesy, but I think, if you can't do this for yourself, no one's going to do it for you. What is your unique brand of expertise? What is it that you can do that no one else can do? And it's about being really confident and articulate about conveying that to the panel. So what is it about you that is unique? Next point is I, not we. Again, a lot of talk about this, but it is really important. Of course, what we do within dementia research is collaborative. Of course, a lot of it is team-based. But when you're in that interview, it's about being able to convey what your unique contribution to the project was, and having really good examples of where you've done that. So yes, teamwork is important, but in that moment, it's about conveying your unique contribution. Then we've got post-it notes. Other brands are available. I was told by my mentor just to take a little post-it note in with you. It forces you on a little tiny square just to write down some key phrases, key messages. I think I wrote on mine, I, not we. That was my big thing. Stop saying we, say I. And you can just put little notes, little reminders, little points that you really, really want to make sure that you say to the panel. Again, it's totally fine. It's allowed, and you should make use of that as well. Now, next point is something I've kind of learned in recent years, is the importance of your body language. And I know there's lots of probably books written on this and articles written on this. It's really important. I'm saying that as I'm hunched over my kind of coffee table, but when you go in the room, it's about having that upright posture. It conveys a sense of confidence. It conveys a sense of assertiveness, even if you're not feeling like that under the surface. So posture is important, the way that we sit, the way that we hold ourselves, and also breathing. I came across this really interesting technique called box breathing, where we breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. And it's otherwise been known as Navy SEAL breathing. And I thought, if it's good enough for those guys, it's good enough for me. That's something that I absolutely do in the run-up to my interview, where I'm waiting to be called in. And actually, for the first few moments of the interview itself, calm the nervous system. And there's loads of research saying as well that it actually improves your concentration and it improves your focus. And if you can improve your focus, you're going to be able to retrieve those examples and you're going to be able to articulate yourself much better. Final thing I'd say from the point of view of an interviewee is the rule of 3. Now, this is something, the idea that you go to a restaurant, they might serve you a starter with 3 little pieces. There's something about 3 that is more satisfying and memorable, and it applies to rhetoric as well in the way that we communicate with each other. I always find that this is a really good way of, one, remembering information you want to say, but it's also a really good way of effectively communicating that to the panel. So if you get asked that standard question, you know, why did you apply for this role? You know, it's about saying, well, I think there's 3 reasons I applied for the role. The first one is, the second one is, the third one is. And it's a really effective way, in my experience, of structuring your responses, which I think comes across really well as well. Okay, next slide. So that's my advice based on my experience from an interviewee perspective. But again, in more recent years, I've been involved in the panels as well, as Chloe was saying too. First thing I'd say is there's almost always an opportunity at the start of an interview to provide any updates to the panel. So that is anything that's happened since the paperwork was submitted. And if you don't get given the opportunity to share this, then you can potentially share this yourself. You can ask for permission to share this either at the beginning or the end. So for me, in my last interview, it was a case of like, I was really fortunate that some of my activities have been featured in the university's teaching excellence framework, and that had happened since my paperwork went in. So I, on my little post-it note, I was like, right, TEF, make sure that, you know, if I forget everything else, make sure I tell them that my stuff went into the gold TEF application. Really important, knock the socks off. Any things you really, really want to highlight, anything that's happened recently that's really good, make sure you convey that, take the opportunity. Next point is around the reach, impact and value. So this gets a bit technical, but again, from an interviewer perspective, they want to see not just what you've done, but its reach, its impact, its value. So what by reach, we mean the spheres of influence. That's a term that my mentor taught me. So what are the spheres of influence? What is the local, the national, the international, the civic ripple effects of the work that you're doing? What is the impact? Who are the beneficiaries of your work? It's being articulate about these things. This will go in the paperwork, but it'll go in your interview as well. And then finally, the value. What is the social value, the financial value, the health value to the local community, the wider community of the dementia research that you're doing? Then, of course, the strategic fit. So you don't want to flatter the panel, that awful thing that we've all been guilty of, where you go, I really want to work in Liverpool because you do such great things and you're all amazing. What you want to do, though, is you want to do your research. You want to look at key people in the department, people that you could collaborate with right now as like an easy win, you know, projects that you could get involved with, ongoing grants that you could join, the short, the medium and the long term. Doing a bit of research makes a massive difference. Having a strategic approach to this so that you can communicate that, how you can fit in with existing activities, so important. And then finally is this reflective cycle. This is something I learned through my teaching qualifications. But when we're giving answers, a really nice way of structuring it, and it moves away from that kind of descriptive account, is to think about what you did, why you did it, how you knew it was effective, and what you would do differently next time as a result of the feedback that you've received. And then it closes that loop. If you can use that in just one or maybe two of the examples that you give, it forces you to go beyond the description, and it just kind of leads to a more kind of in-depth response, which is what the panel are after. So if I was going to try and break it down into 4 things, they're the 4 most important things from an interview perspective that are really going to make you stand out. Next slide, please. So just to summarize, again, whistle-stop tour. I could talk all day about this, but as Chloe said, it's a skill that can be improved. This isn't something that you're kind of born with. It's not something you're either good at or bad at. You know, there's been a hell of a lot of trial and error. I've given a lot of really bog standard interviews in my time, believe me. But each interview makes you stronger. Each interview is learning experience. There's a lesson in all of it. So it's practice. It's just one of those things. Next point. Then we've got, you know, as Chloe's talked about the pre, the during, the post, there's a whole context around this. There's the paperwork, the pre-application, you know, the references, everything. It's a whole ecosystem, if you like, of components. And the interview is just one part of that. So, you know, if it doesn't go as well as you thought, or you feel like you've, you know, flunked a question, it doesn't matter. You've got the CV, you've got your application form, you've got your referees as well. It's a whole picture process that we're looking at. Next point. It's your time to shine, and it's linked to my next point as well, which is around, you know, you've probably waited an awful long time from the point at which you submitted your paperwork to being invited for an interview to the interview happening. There's a lot of nervous energy, there's a lot of apprehension, but it's actually the way that you frame it. I always find that this is your opportunity to showcase yourself. For those of you listening who've got a PhD, who've gone through the Viva process, there's a lot of talk around, like, this is your one opportunity to talk about your skills and talk about all the development that you've been through and all the stuff that you've learned. It's about taking that opportunity by the horns and really running with it. Next point, which is my last point, which is, yeah, you've waited for this moment, try to enjoy it. You know, you've got to be proud of yourself, and that really shows that just, it shines out of your face. You know, the panel can tell. It's about, you know, there's a fine line between being able to sort of be proud of your achievements and being arrogant. But there's nothing arrogant about saying, you know what, I'm bloody proud of what I've achieved, and I'm going to tell you about it because I think I'm the right person for this job. So that confidence is really important. So that's it from me. The last point I want to share is a picture of me last March having a cocktail to celebrate my successful promotion. As you can see on my face, equal parts tired, relieved, but proud. You know, that's the one word I'd use, is just proud of myself. And we should all be proud of our achievements and be confident going into this process. So that's it from me. I'd be more than happy to continue the conversation in the chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Warren. I love how your and Chloe's talks complemented each other so well, because there was so little duplication there. Without, did you two talk in advance? I know some people have, but they complemented each other so well. And I think the point you made about I not we is a really important one. I know I do this all the time. I'm constantly saying we as dementia researcher, but kind of dementia researcher is really just me. And I do that. We're all a little bit modest, aren't we, when it comes to these things, because you kind of don't necessarily take the credit you can deserve. And I think if there's one place where you should take credit, it's either in those promotion applications and in interviews. And we had a blog a couple of weeks ago from Connor Richardson, who talked about applying for a promotion the first time and then applying the second time. And the second time he did it in a very short space of time, where he just bigged himself up far more. But that kind of confidence of saying, taking credit for the things you've done, I think is important.
Someone said to me once, Adam, that kind of phrase, dance like nobody's watching. You've almost got to write the application like no one's ever going to read it, because it can be a bit embarrassing. You know, my mentor was like, you know, reworded some of the stuff I wrote in my application, and it was like, I am, an internationally renowned educational leader, and it's like I would never in a million years have wrote that. But you've got to. If you can't do it, no one's going to do it for you. So you've almost got to write it as if no one's going to read it, and the panel will read it, but it's okay because, you know, you're going for a job. Yeah,
and there's that kind of balance between boasting. I mean, don't exaggerate, but do recognise who you are. And the breathing one,
stuff to back it up, but you know, if it's there, then you want to sell it.
I love the idea as well that if you take in there like a folder with your CV or something to refer back to, sticking a bunch of post-it notes to the front of it. I quite like that, because I've sat there before on an interview panel and people come in there, you know, smartly dressed and sit there with nothing in front of them. And you don't care, do you? As an interview, you don't care if somebody's brought in a bunch of notes that they say, hold on a second, let me just... Or I wouldn't. I don't know if other people do. And the breathing thing, of course, if you have a smartwatch, I know that the one I have has a kind of meditation and breathing tool built into it, which is just like a 60-second thing, isn't it? Where it forces you to breathe. Make use of that bit of tech to help. Okay, so I'm going to jump to some I'm going to jump to some obvious questions that I just want your take on it, because I'm not sure that there are any right answers to these questions, but I'm interested to know your take on obvious things, but these are things that I know that everybody will get anxious about. First of all, is outfit. Like, what do you wear? This has been a controversial topic on social media in the past, saying, "Oh, you know, should you care too much about what you wear?" What are your thoughts on Chloe? What men or women? Anybody, what do different people wear for their interview?
It's an interesting question, because I text so many people in my recent interview about what I should be wearing for this interview. So I had quite a smart outfit, but I didn't feel very authentic on me. So I actually ended up going in jeans, because I felt it was a true representation of me. Like at work, I wear jeans. So I was sort of a black jeans. So it wasn't too, it was still quite smart. But I decided that it was better to sort of feel comfortable and wear what I would feel comfortable in, while trying to look sort of smart casual, rather than going with something super duper smart. I think comfort is important, especially when you're sort of hot and sweaty, and prioritize comfort. Obviously, don't go in tracky bottoms, but comfort, I think, is probably the most important. Smart casual and comfortable.
What about you, Warren? Different
do
perspective.
The whole COVID thing, couldn't we, with just pajamas on the bottom and on the top?
Yeah.
No, it's quite funny, because all the academics I know are quite scruffy. We're quite a scruffy breed generally, so it's quite funny, the idea of suiting and booting for this interview, when everyone knows damn well that you normally rock up in a pair of jeans and a top. I did wear a suit, simply because I don't have enough opportunities to wear a suit, and I quite like wearing a suit. So I thought, you know what, why not? But yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I think it's less about what you wear, and it's more about the way you carry yourself. And you can come in wearing a suit with really, slouched and looking really dishevelled. You can come in wearing jeans and be really, really confident, really assured. So yeah, I think it's more about the way you carry yourself.
It's tricky, isn't it? I can understand the different perspectives on this. I do. Maybe it's because I'm old, but I do err on that kind of side of nobody's ever been judged for being too smart, but they have been judged for being too scruffy. Even if all the interview panel are there in t-shirts and jeans, they're not probably going to judge you if you turn up in some kind of smart outfit, but they might judge you if you turn up in something that's not. So I quite like Chloe, that kind of smart casual, erring on the side. If you're a man, I guess a suit. I can't remember the last time I wore a tie for anything, but hey, why not? But I agree, outfit's a tricky one. Maybe have a look at people's socials. If you know the interview panelists, have a look at what they wear normally. Handshake. What do you go with on the handshake? Are you a firm handshaker? Are you do you shake hands? Do you offer to shake hands? What do you think, Chloe? Is a handshake important, like it is in business?
I think if it was like one-to-one, I would probably shake someone's hand. I probably don't have a very sort of firm, strong handshake. But the interview I've just been through, there were 6 of them on the panel. There was no way I was going around shaking everyone's hand at the start and at the end. So I think it depends on the setting and who you're interviewing as well. But I think it comes back to what you were saying about the outfit. Nobody's going to refuse you a job because you asked to shake their, like, you offered to shake their hand. So perhaps just err on the side of it, of shaking someone's hand.
And maybe some kind of tissue. If you're a clammy person, I'm a bit of a clammy person. Too clammy.
Yeah, same.
You raised I think actually, Chloe, I think it was you raised this point, and I've had this conversation with a few people I mentor recently who have, when they've been looking for jobs to apply for, they've disregarded jobs because there was something in the person's, there was something in there, a skill that was required that they didn't quite have, or a condition like it wasn't quite a full-time job or it wasn't part-time, and so they kind of not applied. And I've been encouraging people these days to say, well, you know, apply anyway. You can always talk about this later. If you have applied for a job that you didn't quite have the right skill for, or there is a condition in there that you need them to change, when do you raise that? Do you raise that at the interview, or do you wait till you're offered? What do you think? What's your view? No, there's no right answer to this, is there? I imagine.
I would typically wait till I was offered. It depends what it is. But so my job at Dundee, I was like, I need to work from home several days a week. And I waited until, because I lived in Edinburgh, so it was, the commute wasn't nice. But I chose to wait until that became an issue, as in I'd been offered the job, to raise it.
So you're one of those people who HR hate. Oh my God, we've offered her the job and now suddenly... What do you do, Warren?
Yeah, it's never come up for me, but I think I'd do the same, to be honest. There's no point raising it. You know, you've got to wait and see to see whether you're offered. But yeah, it's something you definitely shouldn't shy away from.
I am keen to, if the audience have questions, do post them in the chat and we will get in there in a couple of minutes as well. I have one last question from my perspective, which is so earlier today at 11 o'clock, I did a live stream with Alzheimer's Society, who have just launched their doctoral training centre. And they're going to be running PhD applications starting in September for some of those. How do interviews for a PhD differ? Is there anything differently you do when you're applying to do a PhD from somebody who's advertised compared to, say, your lectureship positions you've just both applied for? Chloe.
So the first answer that was coming to my head there was you should be thinking about a PhD as a training. You know, it's a training for experience for you. So you want to talk about your potential. So it's not necessarily, obviously you need to demonstrate what you've done before, but really it's about the potential and what you could learn during that experience. But actually, you should be doing that with any job. So with any job, you should be looking at the potential to learn. But I guess that would perhaps be more of a focus. So it's about your potential, what you could learn during the experience, and what you could then go on to do later on is perhaps what I'd maybe more emphasize when applying for a PhD over a job, say.
What about you, Warren?
Yeah, it's a bit like a fellowship, isn't it? It's more focused on you rather than the wider thing. So I think there's going to be more emphasis in that interview on your skills and your development. Whereas for a lecturer job, it's more around your fit within existing activities. So it's around the bigger picture. And because a PhD is a self-contained program of work, not too dissimilar from a grant, which would be for a program of work. Again, there's not the same kind of short, medium, and long term. Whereas if you're going for like a permanent lecturer gig, you know, they're going to want to know, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? It's obviously a PhD might be 3 years, 4 years. So I think it's the emphasis on you as a candidate. So it's more about you kind of being able to communicate your skills and your ambitions for the project.
I think probably the prep is a little bit different, isn't it? In so much as if by the time you're applying for a postdoc job or a lecture job, you probably would expect that you already know a lot on that topic that you're applying for. And if you're coming out of university or have just finished a master's and you're applying for a PhD, your knowledge level about that subject is going to be lower. So making sure you prepare and read as widely as you can around that topic, because they're the kind of questions I guess they're going to want to know is how ready are you to start this? Not expecting you to know everything, but at least to kind of have, you know, if this is in dementia care, to at least understand, say, how the care system works, or what are the challenges to the care system, or, you know, how do people get diagnosed at the moment in, you know, if we're talking about dementias. Reading up on those subjects quite widely, I think, is important. Honestly, we could chat all day, but if we do that, I'm conscious that there are people still with us, and so what we're going to do now is we're going to wrap things up and move over into the discussion. But before we do that, I just want to remind everybody that we run these sessions, of course, every week. If you've missed anything before, we have a whole repository now. We're building up a nice little archive of previous chat sessions, which have cover things like recruiting to research studies, what it's like doing a PhD, presenting research, industry versus academia outside. There's all kind of things in there. If you go into the Salon section and go to past sessions, all the recordings are there for you to watch. This one will be there as well. And we'll also be back next Wednesday when we're going to talk about clinical trial design. But for now, let's move into the chat discussion. Thank you very much, Chloe and Warren. You've been amazing. And we'll meet you all in the chat where we'll carry on the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks.